in the talks regarding the impending doom that reducing the deficit will have, there is a specter of millions of jobs being lost because government spending is being reduced. The irony is that there's no debate over whether this particular job or that is productive, educates a child, or builds a house. No, it's simply about mass amounts of dollars being spent to create jobs, which then in turn allow people to have money in their pockets to go out and spend. This is the insanity of consumerism, that it is no longer about production of wealth. It's simply about cash hydraulics. Isn't there any discussion about real production of wealth? It's because we haven't yet arrived at an economy that focuses on real production of wealth, since our old economy that did in fact focus on production of real wealth, which ended sometime 50 years ago or so with the advent of super banking, super insurance, super malls, deindustrialization of America, and a massive bloated defense establishment. The sequestration basically cuts $48 billion from domestic discretionary spending every year and $48 billion from defense spending every year. So I would propose a scenario to make you think, what if we doubled that to $96 billion out of each every year? Double the potential job losses from a reasonable estimate of 500,000 a year to 1 million a year. Well, there's some analysts who don't believe there'll be virtually any job losses from these two cuts. 48 billion from domestic discretionary spending and 48 billion from defense. In this, if you have $100 billion and as a result of not spending it, you lose 500,000 jobs, that is $200,000 per job. We're buying a job by spending $200,000. These jobs, including benefits and so forth, is probably around $65,000. So we're spending $200,000 to create a $65,000 job. So apparently we're all fighting over being able to fund $65,000 jobs by spending $200,000 without even questioning this. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a government economist, and I suggested we simply use the money by rebating it back to the people, and I used the example of small business loans, and he was all for that. If we doubled this sequestration and used half of it for small business loans, we would get vastly more jobs than we're getting through the current mess while gradually reducing our deficit. But why should we have the government pick who should be funded or not by small business loans? So Nixon had the idea of a negative income tax. Why not simply give everybody $40,000 a year to do with as they wish if they fell below a certain threshold? Bottom 20 million households in the country, give them each $40,000 each. That would only be $800 billion. And we spent bailing out the banks. No questions about these greater issues. There's simply fear-mongering. The best article I found is from bipartisanpolicy.org. You just Google that and sequestration and you'll find this analysis, which fell pretty much down the center in the various analyses I saw. Another funny thing is that if you Google sequestration job losses, let's see who comes up as the #1 party interested in talking to you. Second to none. At one point when I was looking at this, I got 10 rows of just second to none, but they're the #1. They certainly do seem to know how to get on the top of Google. And second to none is, in fact, the voice of aerospace and defense. The great cancers that are eating the economy is the insurance industry, which produces nothing, and the medical pharma sector, which is 20% of our economy. Now, in my life, I've maybe spent 40 hours with doctors at most in the last 40 years. For me, I could get by just fine with one doctor per 2,000 people. But in fact, we have one doctor per 300 people and masses of amounts of bureaucracy around it. 20% of our economy is sheer madness. If you look at defense, the war on drugs, the war on terror, national security, you're looking at another $1 and $8 or $1 and $7 of our economy is going into this non-productive sinkhole. In the case of the Department of Homeland Security, for example, if we look here, they have 240,000 employees and they cost $60 billion a year. That is $240,000 expenditure for every single person in this bureaucracy. Average salary over at Homeland Security is around 60 or 70,000 at most, including benefits. That means Homeland Security spends about 30% of its money on payroll, 30 to 40%. That the military-industrial complex is a terrible place to spend your money for jobs programs. Yet every congressman is stung when he thinks of cuts to defense in his district. Why can he not think of alternative uses of these monies to create employment in his district that involves real production? What madness is this? Intelligence budget is $53 billion, and that's only what we're allowed to know about. When you put it all together, it's probably closer to $90 billion, and that doesn't include Homeland Security. And if I'm not mistaken, it does not include military intelligence. And if you look here, you'll see that basically what our budget, which is $3.5 trillion, only $615 billion of that is actually spent on things other than Medicare, defense, and Social Security. So let's subtract out Social Security and Medicare from this, and you'll see that we spend as much on defense as we do on discretionary, on all our programs put together. And in fact, the interest, which is largely generated by overspending on defense, is now eating away. It's $1 in every $3 when you compare interest to discretionary spending. $1 in every $4 of our ability to fund programs in the United States simply to interest from overspending on military imperialism. For those of you who think this is a good idea, here's a chart showing the USA's expenditures versus China, Russia, so forth, and you'll see that most of the other countries that spend a lot on the military are in fact our allies. So let us sort this, spending in billions. Whoops. And you'll see that, in fact, let's see here, you could say China, India, and Russia are not directly our allies, although India certainly is fairly closely allied to the US at the moment. But UK, France, Japan, South Korea, Germany certainly are. So it's a fantastic sum of money. It produces nothing. The military is to act as a private police force for global super corporations. It is to guard the wealthy from any sort of turbulence. You'll see here that market regulators do not even expect job cuts from sequestration any great amount. And if we look at some other countries, the United States in reality, when you look at the military and Homeland Security and intelligence and the war on drugs, is spending close to 16% of our economy on security. Whereas we, of course, claim our defense spending is only about 4% of our economy. So here are the economies that are least burdened by military spending as a percentage of GDP. Iceland, let's see if we scroll down the list a bit here. Switzerland, less than 1%. Austria, less than 1%. Spain, 1%. And we continue and continue and continue. And here it is, United States. Where are we in this? We are at 4.7%, nearly $120 spent on defense. And no, ironically, Iraq, with another massive defense budget, mainly coming to us in the forms of weapons procurement, no doubt. This is just in terms of percent of gross domestic product. Saudi Arabia at 10% of gross domestic product. Israel at 6.5%. Imagine if we reduced this $2 trillion down to 1.5% of our GDP at 16 trillion gross domestic product. That would be about $225 billion. And when you compare that to other countries' militaries, on parity with China, for example, that would literally be enough money that you could give the bottom third of this country $50,000 a year for each household for funding towards small business if you want to put some strings on it. You could create massive prosperity, but nobody really looks at real productivity. They simply look at this game of smoke and mirrors. It reminds me of the economy of Nazi Germany. My name is Alexander Hagen. Good night and good luck. And don't be scared.